Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to our special session meeting for the budget work session. We do have a quorum. We have 5 board members present in the boardroom. Mr. Carroll is on Zoom. Mr. Johnston is not with us. I would just ask that we send special prayers to Mr. Johnston's family, especially his dad. His dad had surgery yesterday and is in the hospital. So, let's just think about his family tonight as he's recovering from surgery and as we pray. So at this time, I'll call on Mr. Wooten for the invocation, followed by Mr. Byrd for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we're just so thankful to be here today to serve this county, to serve our students, dear God. And thank you for your wrapping your arms around our school system during this school year. You've answered so many prayers this year, Lord. We just lay it at your feet and you take care of it, dear God. And I ask that you bless this meeting about our school budget. Help us be good steward of the dollars that you provide for this school system, that we can maximize the investment in our students so they'll be prepared for life, dear Lord. And thank you for blessing Johnston County and this school system and our many employees, the students and their families through this COVID year. You have blessed them in so many ways. We're careful to give you all the praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Just want to say thank you to everybody for being present tonight and moving our meeting from Monday to tonight. Appreciate the Finance Committee and all their hard work with Mr. Britt and his team, with Tabitha, as well as Dr. Bracey, on just working through the budget for the new year. Comes up July 1. I think we had some great conversations with our county commissioners in our joint meeting. I think they have a better understanding of where we sit physically with our money and what we have in our fund balance and what we're looking to do to be good stewards with the money. Not only that they provide us on a yearly basis, but our state and federal as well. And also that Mr. Britt's going to get into this a little bit more, but state is a little bit more of a challenge of throwing a dart at a dartboard in the dark, because we don't know how much they're going to give us from a year basis, and it's always 2 or 3 months after the fact of us receiving that, and so our local money is very, very important to fill that gap, to assist in that time frame. And I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this proposed budget. I will say that we've had some good conversations with them, and I think they're very understanding of where we sit financially now, and looking forward to having some additional conversations about our proposed budget for next school year. And that will be, we'll vote on that in our May 11th meeting, and then we'll send that over to the county commissioners for their approval on May 15th, I believe is when they're going to do that. So just thank y'all for taking time out of your day. Thank you for what you do every day for Johnston County Public Schools. It is a team effort, and I think we've made great strides, and I just want to say again how excited I am about the board retreat that we had a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was a phenomenal retreat, great things out of it, even the exercise we did, and we were scratching our head on, man, this is tough just on this one little thing. That they have a lot to look at and understand and put together on a daily basis, as well as roll it up to present to us. But I think the most important thing I got out of that meeting was the first hour and a half of just understanding who the individuals are. And some things that, some facts that just stuck with me as far as their family and where they come from. I thought that was very important, and I appreciate them sharing that information with us. So I look forward to tonight's budget work session, and at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bracy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Just if we can move to the next slide, just a reminder to everybody of our academic goal by the end of the 2023-24 school year. 100% of Johnston County public schools will earn a school letter grade of A, B, or C. And we believe that this budget is a big part of that and will play an important role in laying that foundation to reach that goal that we ultimately want to be at the end of the 23-24 school year. So we look forward this evening to a robust discussion. Everything is on the table. We can have those conversations. I appreciate the work of Mr. Britt and his staff and all the long hours to get us to this point. And we just want to hear from you and provide us some feedback as a leadership team. So thank you all, Tabitha, Stephen, for all that you do and getting us to this point. This is an academic budget and a safety budget and all those things, but it's a very important step as we lay the foundation to become the academic district that we want to become in June of 2024. So with that being said, Mr. Britt, I'll turn it over to you at this time.
Good evening, board members, Dr. Bracy. So you know I love to talk money, and so I'm excited to be here this evening to talk about. Yeah, you may have to reel me in every once in a while if I start getting too long-winded or too into the weeds. But just looking at our overview for this evening, we obviously we're here to talk about budget and give an update on there. So we've broken it down into different components. So we've got our local operating request, our capital outlay request, and to give you a quick update on the $100 million that we have available at our disposal for ESSER and a brief overview of what that might look like. And so before we really dig into the budget, for the benefit of those that are not too familiar with this process, we'll give you a quick overview of what kind of the legal foundation is of why we're all here tonight and what the different components of how all these pieces come together. What's the governor's role? What's the General Assembly's role? What's the county commissioner's role? So, and that's for the benefit of those who aren't familiar with how this comes together. So, the state constitution requires that the governor present a proposed budget to the North Carolina General Assembly each year, and so the General Assembly's authority is the power of the purse. So they're the ones that approve, that come up with legislation that in a biannual budget, or to create a biannual budget that is then presented to the governor for either to be signed or rejected. So our role in that process is that by May 1st each year, the superintendent is required to present a budget message and a proposed budget to the Board of Education, local Board of Education. And so that's the purpose of what we're here tonight to do, is to discuss that proposed message, or the superintendent's message and his proposed budget. So from here, we once the board approves this budget request on May 11th, then it would be turned over to the county commissioners immediately after that. And we have a deadline of May 15th each year to submit our budget proposal to the county commissioners. Of course, just like Mr. Sutton mentioned earlier, we're really throwing darts in the dark, especially this year, because there's a tremendous amount of variation in what could be, from our legislative leaders of what they want to see for this upcoming year. And so that's this year's the budget is particularly difficult to forecast. Normally we would have at least some idea, but we'll kind of talk about the things that we do know, and the first of which is the governor's budget. And so, the governor's budget obviously is for state funds. And so what he has proposed this year, or for this upcoming year, is, of course, certified pay increases of 10% over a 2-year period. You've got non-certified, so the difference between certified and non-certified, you can think about that as your teachers, and then your non-certified is everybody else. And so to restore the master's pay for teachers, we're one of the few states in the nation that currently does not pay extra for new teachers that come on board with master's degrees. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, just bringing that out, why that's a line item in his budget. The also an increase of the maximum teacher pay to $55,000, and then a $15 per hour minimum wage for non-certified employees. There's also, and this one would be huge for us, which would be removing the EC funding cap of 12.75%. And so, as we've talked about before, that cap means that you cannot receive any state funding for greater, for EC children once that EC population exceeds 12.75% of your total population. And so there's a cap on there, and that's where we talked about in our joint session of using the analogy of the store. If you're a store owner and you are providing goods and services for your clients, but you don't receive any revenue for it, and so that's what the governor is targeting with that cap. Cost of living adjustment increase for retirees. One-time bonus of $2,000 to all employees. Of course, bonds, and that's been a big topic for several years now, is the ability for state construction bonds. And then to expand EC, LEP, TAs, at-risk students. So some of those are acronyms for those watching at home. EC is exceptional children, LEP, limited English proficiency, and TAs are teacher assistants. So. My understanding is an increase in funding in those particular categories. Is that was your take, Dr. Bracey? Yes, sir.
That's my understanding of it as well. Yes.
That's in addition. That's my understanding.
What's the gap for that?
I believe it's that we currently identify about 15 point something percent, 15.6, 15.
And that attributes to how many dollars, just so everybody knows?
So in 2020, so I'm going to combine our EC and pre-K because we do blended classrooms. I don't have the individual broken out for me, but off the top of my head, but we were about $10.8 million in the hole for 2020.
I knew it was somewhere close to $9 or $10 million.
So we'll be less than that this year. Our curriculum department has made tremendous strides, but there's still a tremendous gap in there. And so when we talk about a gap, we're talking about the money has to come from somewhere. You got the expense, the money comes from somewhere. So what ends up happening is you pull funds away that you could have used for other things. We could have hired teachers for K-12 instruction, or you could do a lot. You're pulling away from other places to fill in a gap. So
And when you say other, the main other place is local funds.
Exactly.
Is low wealth money still in the deal with?
It is.
Okay, so that's still in his proposal.
Oh, in the governor's budget, I don't recall the governor addressing that specifically. It may have been in there, but I don't, off the top of my head, I don't recall seeing that.
And just, Mr. Britt, thank you for bringing this about the governor's budget. Just for everybody to understand at home too, is this will have to pass through the House and the Senate. And unfortunately for us, in the past 2 years, they haven't passed a budget. Hopefully this year we can see where they will pass a budget. It may not be exactly what we're looking at here, but at least we have some kind of guidance on what he's already presenting and proposing. But it'll be up to the state legislators in the House to pass this budget.
Well, and also, just for the folks at home, even if the governor's, let's say the governor's budget is passed, folks may be saying, well, what does that have to do with local money? We have many teachers and employees who are being paid, they're hired with local money, and those people have to receive the same amount of raise that our state paid employees.
That's a great point, because the local budget is is tremendously impacted by the decisions that is made by the General Assembly. A prime example, kind of piggybacking off what you said, Ms. Sessoms, every county in the state provides a supplement for teachers. So additional funding in addition to what the state provides. And our current model for supplements is a percentage increase. So in other words, you get 10.5% in addition to your state salary. So if you have a 10% increase in state cost for teachers, with the state budget is going to cover that, but the state doesn't cover the portion that is in our local funds, and so that's where your county tax dollars come into play. And so there's a direct cause and effect, between what the General Assembly and the governor come together and pass, and what happens to our local budget.
And I know Ms. Sessoms always identifies our stakeholders at home, which is very important. I know our job as a school board member for us to reach out to our local General Assembly representatives, and we do that on an ongoing basis. But they're also your representatives at home as well. So I think it's vitally important that it's not just the school board reaching out to our representatives, all our taxpayers, and they're your representatives too. So it's vital that you reach out to your local representatives as well, and let them know how important this state budget is. Thank you.
And of course, we don't have any slides on the state budget because generally the state budget, as mentioned earlier, comes out much later in the year. So that's the part where you were talking about throwing darts in the dark. So what we can talk about is what we do know, and some of that is Dr. Bracey's budget priorities for this upcoming year. Okay. So some of his priorities are, of course, sustaining operations. That of course is a no-brainer. We have to be able to pay our bills. We have to be able to keep the lights on. We have to keep being able to pay teacher supplements. We have to be able to meet our obligations. Of course, that's budget priority number one. And of course, right under that is investing in our employees. And investing, I think, is a great word to use because that's exactly what you're doing. Any business, any organization, anywhere, that's exactly what you're doing. You're taking money, you're investing it in your employees, and you're expecting a return for your investment. And of course, the difference between us and a business is our operating profit is not in money left over or dollars. Our operating profit is the educational attainment of our students. And so that, I think that's it's number 2 on our list for a reason. And, increasing student achievement, obviously, as Dr. Bracey mentioned earlier, that we've got a target of 23-24 of having no D or F schools. And additional pre-K through 12th grade exceptional children's teachers and teacher assistants. Now that may seem counterproductive or counterintuitive of what we just got through talking about with our deficit in EC. So I've heard Dr. Bracey mention before he can walk and chew gum at the same time. So that's what we're talking about doing. We're talking about trying to balance the budget as best we can. And truth be told, we're never, in this current funding environment, we are not going to have a self-sustained EC program. We need additional federal dollars, we need additional state dollars in order to meet those obligations. But we are able to tap into our CARES Act budget to help meet these last 2 bullet points that we have on the presentation.
Stephen, if we get those dollars to help support additional funding, that will help, as Mr. Wood referred to it as a gap, it will help close that gap that we're paying locally. If we could get those dollars locally, like some new money or new funding locally versus what we're already getting.
That's right.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
That's where I was going with that.
Yep.
You're talking about additional funding. Obviously, we're talking about local right now. So
it's a trickle down effect. Mm-hmm. It has you won't see EC costs directly in local, so because we're going to pay for it with funds, but it'll displace other costs and push it down into local. There. And of course, increases social, emotional, and mental health supports provided to all children. And that's been a big topic lately. It's been in the news. It's certainly something that is on everyone's mind. So some of our budget factors. We just talked about the unpredictability of the state budget. The governor's budget is not something that will likely come to fruition, but it's, at least in its entirety. But there is a pretty significant variation in what could occur. That if we look back at 2019, I believe the governor and the General Assembly had some disagreements on funding and on teacher pay. And both entities wanted to increase teacher pay, if I remember right. But the difference in the cost of those two seemed to be the holdup, and that changes the scope of what we are doing with our budget, both for state funds and for local funds. It makes a difference of, are we going to have funds left over at the end of the year, or could we dip into our fund balance, even though that doesn't necessarily that doesn't change anything that the county is looking at, or what, it's almost like they're independent. Well, they're independent. They move independently of one another on there, and that's one thing that causes a challenge, because we don't have control over that. That's not something that any of us in this room can. We can prepare for as best we can, but we can't predict it, unfortunately.
Mr. Britt,
Yes, sir.
hypothetically, if the state does not pass another budget, what would we operate off of from a state funding formula for this year?
So we were operating off a biannual budget, so they're going to have to pass something. They'll have to give us some sort of operating budget, even if it's a continuing resolution type budget, where it just allows us to operate as we currently are. So that something will have to be passed before July, so that we can keep working.
It won't be in the form of, I know they've done several, is it mini grants?
Mini
Is
budgets.
that, am I using the right word? So it would that be solved in that way, or,
That
I mean, then the mini grants would carry on, right?
Yeah, that I don't know. That I'm not too sure how that piece works there. Yeah. But of course, we have a ADM fluctuation. We've had tremendous growth over the last 20 plus years. We hit a plateau at related to the coronavirus, and that's true statewide. I'm not sure if any district was able to meet its ADM expectation this year. There was ADM decline in just about every district in the state. And so what the unknown is, and why we call it a fluctuation now, is we don't know what next year is going to look like. Now that we're going to be hopefully back to normal, we're expecting significant growth in the number of students. Of course, changes in state and federal regulations, local and state economic circumstances, and one of the larger ones is, will school systems be held harmless for ADM again next year? And so we'll look at what the cost of that not being held harmless might look like for Johnston. So looking at our calculations, one of my more favorite parts, we can talk numbers now. So we'll look at, we've talked about this before, but I'll just bring it to your attention again. It's unfortunate that we've saved money this way, but it's the reality of it is we have saved a significant amount of money because of COVID. And these are some of our larger impacts. One of them is, of course, utilities at $1.1 million. So how we've calculated that is we compare directly year to year. July to March 2020, July to March 2021, and what we spent over each time frame. And it was $1.1 million of savings in utilities. We had $2.5 million of savings in bus cost, and $1.2 million of savings for substitutes. So you're looking at roughly $5 million in these three categories alone of savings that we've had that we would not have had in a normal year. And so if we flip ahead and look at the impact of not being held harmless. So when we talk about being held harmless, what I'm referring to is our number of students. So the DPI forecasted that we would have 37,000, I think it was 800 students or so. Yeah, actually it's on the page, 37,837 students. We had ended up with about 36,000. So we were down about 1,200 or a little over 1,250 students. Now, and looking forward to next year, DPI has us projected at 36,587. So it's a 1,250 student decrease. If you take the average state per pupil funding, and that's, you can find that by going to DPI statistical profile, and I think it's table 24 is what I pulled that from. It is for Johnston County Public Schools, that's $6,604 per child. Multiply that times 1,250 students, and you've got a funding decrease between this year and next year of over $8 million. And so when we talk about we're adding $9 or $10 million to the budget this year, well, there's a lot of it right here. And so that's why, as we are talking, it's going to be hard for folks to understand when we're talking about we've got $9 or $10 million left over at the end of this year, and we're going to ask for a funding increase for next year. Why is that? And this is why, because we have we've got a lot of cost that we didn't have this year. This was an unusual year, and then we're losing funding, of what DPI is forecasting for us this upcoming year. Now, to help counteract some of that loss in funding, there's a planned 46 position reduction in force. Now, to be clear, nobody's losing their jobs. I want to make absolutely certain we're not reducing. Nobody's going to be laid off. None of that is going to happen whatsoever. This is a reduction in a planning allotment, and so there's far more. There will be far more than 46 positions that turn over from year to year. It just means that we rehire 46 less people than what we would have hired if the funding were there.
Okay, is this, 46 position reduction related to the $8 million loss?
It is. It's related to the 1,250 student decline.
So in that regards, we would need 46 less positions.
That's correct. Yep. So, right. Yeah. That's right. It's cause and effect. Yep. And
Of
so,
course, we hope they show up, Ms. Andrews. We hope, yeah, absolutely. We hope they come. That's right. Yes, ma'am. As we plan, absolutely.
right. And so,
So they got to do something. Like you said, the question was asked. They got to do something for us to have some type of budget. So they're going to have to make a decision whether we're held harmless or not. So we'll know where we stand with next year's school budget. The key is the timing of all that.
that's right. So we. The majority are. So it's a combination of every budget. I think it's actually every state budget save possibly 069. There's a couple budgets that are not dependent on ADM, but the majority, almost every single budget we have would be impacted.
Mr. Britt, just from talking to other financial officers in other districts, what is your gut feeling about being held harmless for next year? What is the consensus of everybody you've talked to?
To not plan on it, to plan on that we're going to lose the positions. That's I haven't heard anybody express any optimism in that.
Well, and for people maybe listening, help me. Let's say students come back. The state then, if they're here for ADM, the state then will help provide more positions to us. But obviously, that's not the prime time to be hiring teachers.
Yeah,
I get that. I'm just saying, you want to be hiring them right now, but I'm just, for the public to understand, you get them back, but the problem is you get them back after school's already started, and it's slim pickings.
Miss Andrews, you just hit the nail on the head because we're going to be searching, for students or as teachers. Wake County schools are going to be searching. Wilson is going to be searching. Harnett's going to be searching. Everybody.
To me, that's the big problem here, is that we know some of these students are coming back, and we may not have the staff.
Excuse me, Ms. Andrews. Mr. Britt, those funds would drop December?
December,
Yeah.
yes, sir. So we've already reached out to DPI to let them know, hey, we feel like this 36.5 is low. I've already mentioned to DPI, like, I would be shocked if we had less than 37,000 students. And then my question is, just to your point, are funds going to be there? Are funds going to be there for us to get those extra teachers at that point? Or is there going to be a reserve fund at the state that is going to help offset that? Because I'm a little worried that not only us, but several other districts around the state, especially the ones that are growing rapidly, are going to be under forecasted, because, right. And that we're going to end up with 36, we might end up with 37.5 next year. And then we're scrambling to hire teachers, but, right. So that's,
What did you mean by drop in December? I don't know what that means.
The additional allotment from the state would be put into the accounts for finance about December.
So just to make sure I understand and clarify for everybody at home, they're going to provide us the planning allotment off the 36,587. So if we come in at 37.5, that's roughly almost 1,000 more. That additional funding would not come until, like Dr. Bracy said, in December.
that's right.
So we're operating from July 1 to December with $1,000 student less allotment. Basically, the ADM wouldn't come until this 20th day, but still from August to December without that additional funding.
That's
And you still have to hire teachers and have them in the classroom.
Correct.
You still have to
So-
pay for them.
And it's a major gamble, absolutely. And the other thing is, I just want everybody to understand how critical and appreciative we are of all of our local dollars, because I think a lot of times these types of disinformation is not made clear to everyone, and they don't understand why local is so important. But here we are having to operate with 37,500 students as a guest. Let's just use that as a hypothetical situation, and the money is only being provided for us for 36,587. So we have to make that money up somewhere. And if you don't have it in a fund balance or local doesn't help you, we can't get those other teachers that we need.
Right, and another thing is this doesn't, am I right here? This doesn't take into consideration growth. I mean, I know I realize growth will be absorbed probably in the additional students besides 36.5, but growth is not even considered by the state
That's right.
until they come through your door.
That's right.
How did they come up with this number? I'm just curious.
They've got some magic math in Raleigh. I don't really know. Yeah.
Voodoo math.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they do have formulas and metrics. They look at birth rates. They look at your you're advancing your students from one grade to the next. And
Is it, Mr. Carroll, 0.5 per house that's being built?
yeah, that I don't know.
But, in the old days, it was 2.5 children for every rooftop that was built. So it's considerable. I think based on the ORED, they have dropped that. Is that not right, Mr. Britt?
It's under 2 now, I think, Mr. Carroll.
Was it 1.5 or something?
It may be, that may be a high number as well, but you're getting close to it.
Yeah, it was. That was quite surprising to me to hear the calculation that they were using per rooftop for children that we would be expected in the elementary grades based on housing. So, and to go back to that ADM funding that the state does, how they play that game, it's important, we understand it, but it's also important that the public understands, and county commissioners for that matter, the importance of us having a good fund balance that is available to cover those things until we can get funding for that. So I just thought that would be an interesting point to make, that's why fund balance needs to be there.
That's a good point, Mr. Carroll, because you can have years where you're going the opposite direction, where you were expecting to have a much higher number of students and a much smaller number of students end up showing up. And in those years, DPI takes it back in December. You know, so I like to say DPI giveth and it taketh away. So,
You and I have lived that before, haven't we?
we have experienced that pain. And that's where fund balance comes in, because I mean, normally you wouldn't have this much of a swing from one year to the next, but even if you only had half that, so at 8.2 million, so you have half that, that's a $4 million swing. And we have had a 600 student swing from one year to the next. And so that's why we're talking about, and even though this doesn't, it's an indirect impact on local. And that's why it's held, that's why we've got this listed under the local part, because when your state falls short, where do you make up for it? What's going to be in local is where you come up with it.
That goes back to the analogy of the bricks, I believe, the mortar, right?
That's right. We need more mortar. That's right. To fill it in. So then going back and looking at the potential impact for state raises. So again, we're throwing darts in the dark here, to use Mr. Sutton's analogy. So we just split the difference and said, well, what if we base it on a 5% increase in salaries, and then we look at a 8% increase in matching benefits, because you've got, with your matching benefits, not only is it a percent of your salary. So when your salaries go up, so do your benefits. Each year, retirement and health insurance has generally climbed from year to year. That's why you see a significant cost increase there for matching benefits. And so if this is true, so if we say a 5% increase in salaries, and this would be a state raises, we would have roughly a $3 million impact in our local funds. So that's part of that trickle down. And of course, we're still essentially guessing, because we don't know. We don't know what the salaries are going to be. We don't know what the funding is going to be. So you truly are throwing those darts, without knowing where they're going. But that's the impact if we experience a 5% change. So looking more at good stuff now. We've had a couple of negatives there. Let's look at good stuff. So, what would a increase in, let's say, a 1 percentage point change or increase for teacher supplements look like? And so, our current teacher supplement schedule is 10.5% from 0 to 8 years, 11.5% from 9 to 16, and so on and so forth, right up to 13.5%. So this is a supplement in addition to the teacher's state salary. And like I mentioned earlier, every county in the state that I'm aware of has a supplemental pay for teachers. And so if we were able to bump that just 1 percentage point and take it up from 10.5 to 11.5 and so on, we would be looking at about a $1.7 million increase in local cost to get that, to continue to be more competitive with our teacher pay.
Mr. Britt?
Now, can I ask a question about this teacher supplement increase? I had a conversation. It seems that at some point, and Todd, Mr. Chairman, you may know more about this than I do. Was there some conversation the last year or two, county commissioners and the school board had agreed to a 3 increases in the teacher supplement in this county?
Mr. Carroll, I think before I was on the board, the previous board at that time, I think Mr. Wooten was involved, and there was some type of agreement in place. And I believe, Mr. Wooten, correct me if I'm wrong, the last time we increased supplements, was that 2018?
It's been a couple of years since we've increased supplements, but there was a more of a verbal agreement that they would do it 3 years consistent in a row.
Now, was that, were they looking at a 1% per year for a 3-step increase for a total of 3% over a certain number of years? I'm not sure if I heard any years involved, if it was over like a 3-year period or a little bit longer.
I would have to go back and look, Mr. Carroll, but it was a commitment of 3 years, but I'm not totally sure about the full 1% each year.
Yeah. Well, I just throw that out to say I would encourage us to include that in this year's budget. I would be so brave as to say we should include that.
I totally agree.
I agree with you.
Yep.
And in case the board wasn't aware, we are hiring bus drivers and we are accepting applications. So, as we discussed, previously, we're looking at a proposed new schedule for bus drivers that would be a $15 per hour minimum pay. The cost would be $641,000. That would be the most it would cost, as we talked about before. The more driver onlys that we could bring on board, the lower our overtime costs would be to help offset some of this. And again, to be clear to folks at home, we're not talking about, for those that want to maintain their overtime, we're not talking about cutting pay for those. There's plenty of vacancies. There's plenty of ability to do both, to increase pay and still provide overtime to those that want it. So looking at the impact of Thanksgiving Elementary from an operational standpoint, we receive funding for the principal salary, so that extra money will come in. So that's why we have a $0 cost there, and as a position allotment. And if we were to add 2 assistant principals, 3 front office staff, their matching benefits, and then we look at utilities based off of what we paid at Riverwood for 2019. That total expected operational cost increase would be about $387,000 on there. And that all would have a trickle-down. Utilities are directly paid in local, and the rest would have a trickle-down effect. We would pay it out of state funds, but it would displace other things that would need to
So
drop.
the APs are paid out of local?
They're paid out of state funds. We'll pay them out of either our 069 budget or our 005. But what'll happen then is we'll have less other things that we could have done with that 069 budget, and that'll drop down into local. That's what makes school finance a little bit tricky to follow and hard to that's right. Yeah. So to summarize, and that's a little bit hard to read on the screen, but to summarize what the superintendent's current expense budget request is for this upcoming year. We're looking at somewhere around $9 or $10 million fund balance addition this year. And of course, as we talked about, we need to back out, the savings that won't happen next year, because that was an anomaly. So if you back out that, $5 million worth of savings there, and our expected net loss of state funds due to ADM of $5.8 million, a normal year we would have been pretty much a break even. You see a slight red there, but the reality is we don't know exactly what that number would have been. It more than likely would have been a break even. Maybe a little addition, maybe a little loss. But in other words, we would not have had that $10 million that we are forecasting that we're going to have this year. So then you add in what our budget proposal or what our expected cost increase would be for next year, which would be the $3 million for potential state raises and benefits. Again, that's just a guess. We don't know until the General Assembly passes the budget. 1 percentage point increase in teacher supplements would be $1.7 million. We've got our $641,000 driver pay increase, $387,000 for our expected operational costs at Thanksgiving, would bring the total request of additional funds to $5.7 million on there.
Mr. Britt, let me interrupt you for just a moment. I noticed the COVID substitute savings, and we've talked about doing something for our substitutes. Is that figured in here anywhere, or are we waiting to see if the state?
We're waiting to see what the state does, because there was talk about bonuses and pay increases for teachers, because that will also impact the pay and funding for substitutes for the.
So if the teachers receive a raise, so the substitutes will also.
Substitutes are based on a beginning year's teacher, or it's a percentage of a year zero teacher. So out of that $35,000. So if there's a 10% increase in your beginning year or beginning teacher's pay, there would be a 10% increase in substitute pay as well.
Mr. Britt, this 5.773 number, the additional current expense just for people at home, was it 72 million that we were given last year from the county commissioners?
That's correct. It's 72 million, so this will take it up to 77 and change. 77 million and change.
I'm just going to say that by far this is the most detailed information we've had in a budget work session. I thank you and your staff for this. And it's no question where that money, the additional money, is going and why it's needed. And it's something that we have just broken down and shown it in a detailed format. So thank you guys for putting that together.
Sir. You know, as the sales pitch goes, but wait, there's more. So,
Steve, you started off and I'll jump in.
okay, yes, sir. So we'll
So we don't need to take a deep breath yet.
not yet. There's a little more, because that's right. Because there's one thing that was lacking on there, and that was one of Dr. Bracey's main points on there was improving student moving us from D and F schools to a C school, and that if you recall in there was no money set aside for that, and that's where this slide kicks in.
Absolutely. I do think it's important that we give consideration to incentivizing academic performance at those challenging schools. As everybody knows, we have 15 D and F schools in our district, and we certainly hope to move them not only to C's but possibly B's and A's, and it can be done. There's no question about that. So what we lay out here is dollar amounts that will be associated with those D and F schools that will reward the certified and classified staff both if those schools reach certain academic goals, such as exceeding growth and meeting growth, and the amounts are listed there. And there's also a bonus that if they move at least to a C, what they will reach, and the maximum would be $3,000 per certified staff member. Stephen and I have been in a district where something similar to this was done in a certain region of that particular county, which was difficult to staff and was struggling with performance. And after this incentive was put into place, that district of that LEA performed at a high level as everybody else as far as growth and performance is concerned. So certainly we're hopeful that these incentives in place would, let's face it, when you're labeled a D or F school, it's difficult to recruit and retain teachers. I've been at that perspective at a difficult to staff school, and I've been at a school where everybody knocked on my door before the vacancy got posted. And if you're in a D or F or a low performing school, you're going to have a much more difficult time staffing. And we're hopeful that these incentives will motivate teachers to want to be, or teachers and certified and classified staff to want to be a part of those said schools. Because let's face it, there are great kids in all of our schools, and we want to put wonderful teachers in all of our schools. So, Stephen, I don't know if you want to read through the numbers.
Sure. So yeah, we're looking at a $1,000 bonus for teachers that are at a school that meets growth. 2,000. So it's a 1, 2, 3. 2,000 to exceed growth, and then 3,000 if a school moved to a C or higher. And of course, the maximum would be 3,000 in any given year. So we've actually it's a different proposal. We didn't include this in the funding request because we're actually asking for something a little bit unique with this. We are asking this to be a separate funding agreement, to be a reimbursement based. So instead of us plugging $3.6 million additional into our request, we say, county commissioners, we're asking for a 4-year commitment to this program and make it reimbursement based. So if we pay $1 million in supplements next year, we send you the bill we show you where we've paid, where our student grades or excuse me, our school grades have increased, or we've met growth or exceeded growth. This is what we paid out, and we're asking for a reimbursement for that, so that from the county commissioner's standpoint, they can have dollars going out. Every dollar that they're putting out for this goes right to the teachers, right to those that are on the front lines that are making this happen, making this a reality. And so it's a bit different than what we've talked about or what we've done in the past, where we're hoping to make this a little more palatable to all parties.
And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, give me 1 sec. Those of us who went to the Flame for Learning luncheon yesterday, where we recognized our Teacher of the Year, we heard Mike from the chamber stand up there and talk about the growth that we're seeing. If we can remove these schools from the D and F list, it's only going to enhance economic development here in the county. It's only going to make us more attractive. We want to give our chamber, our chambers, and our realtors a great product to sell to people, to be able to say, well, that school system is great, has no D or F schools. It only has A's, B's, and C's. And even those schools that are currently C's, they're growing so fast academically. They're making great academic progress. They'll be A's and B's before you know it. So that is our goal, to help those schools and incentivize and reward robust academic performance in historically challenging schools.
I couldn't agree more, Dr. Bracy, and like you said, it definitely is going to have a major positive effect on our economic development. And what is the first thing that a potential buyer coming into your county looks at, and that is the school district that their kids are going to be going to, because they're very, that is very important to them. I like how this performance bonus is set up in a reimbursement standpoint, and it's a win-win for us and the county, because if from an economic standpoint, development standpoint, for major corporations coming in, this is a small token of appreciation to our teachers and staff at those schools on what the return is going to be for the county. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to incentivize the staff and teachers.
So we're just asking, in just a scenario, asking the commissioners to set aside this amount of money each year, the maximum I know is what you have here, and then we'll see, hopefully we'll be reimbursing teachers.
That's right. I mean, year one
and classified staff.
Yeah, by year 4, that would directly coincide with the goal. So
When you talked about classified staff, are you talking about all classified staff in the school? All certified staff in the school? Not
all
just
teacher assistants, all custodians, child nutrition
Good.
staff.
Everybody
Good.
plays a role.
That's everybody that goes in that building as an employee of that building.
I like that. That
Yeah.
is,
We did
they
something
are
like this years
valuable.
ago.
Yes, we did with PBAP
Yep.
years ago.
Yep.
But
the lower performing schools didn't get anything.
well, this I think this is exactly what we need, because what will happen is you will attract your best teachers into those schools, and
There'd
we
be
all
some
know.
teachers that get on the transfer list and say, hey,
Absolutely. It's a great teacher retention tool. And as Mr. Sutton said, education is the economic driver in a community.
It is.
And so this is truly an investment
Correct.
in Johnston County, not just in our school system, but it's a true investment in our county.
absolutely. Yeah.
For many years about our I-95 corridor schools and how we could address some of our performance there. And this is one of the first efforts that I've seen in many years to address or put an emphasis on those schools, not necessarily just I-95, but any school that is, underperforming. But this I think will give the communities that these schools reside in, a little confidence that the school board acknowledges that we have to do something to help move these schools along, incentivize staff, and do something to attract, the brightest and the best into these schools so we can see them improve. And I like it. I think it's a good idea. It's a first step in saying we recognize we have to do something different for these schools that are lagging behind.
And you know, if you went back and looked historically at the last data that we had in 2019, we had schools that staff would have received these things. We had schools in DNF who were meeting growth. You know, of course we don't have any data from then, but you know, it rewards hard work because they were working hard. They just weren't getting any recognition.
Yes.
So if there's no other questions on that, we'll move over to the capital outlay request, and we've got our phoner friend behind us again with Mr. Brooks back here, in case you get any technical questions that the bean counter can't handle. So we're looking at a $2.9 million request. That's a total request for this upcoming year, and that's a $2.1 or so million increase over this current year. Now, for a district our size, that is actually still a very low number. One of the reasons why we're able to have such a low capital request here is because we have a lot of new schools that don't have the same level of maintenance that a district with a lot of older schools would have. But at the same time, you know, we received $800,000 this year, and that's I don't know how Mr. Moore is able to meet all the capital needs with that type of budget. So looking, he's got it broke down into specific projects, and you will notice that as you go through this list, there's not wants on here. You know, there's no Taj Mahals in here. There's no, you know, it's directly, you know, need based, and so, you know, you look at you got boilers and playground replacements and chillers that are, you know, how old is that now? Do the quick math, and you know, 26 years old or so. You know, there's a lot of needs that are on this list here, and we'll keep flipping through so you can see them all. I won't go through every one of them, but the main point is that, you know, there's no wants in here. Everything that's in here are things that schools need. So it is a considerable increase over this current year's funding, but it's all going towards projects that need to be completed. If there's no questions on that, I'll keep moving forward and talk a little bit about our emergency funding. So that is our CARES Act. You know, there's several different terms for it: CARES Act, CRF, ESSR, or ESSER. There's a whole lot of terminology there, but this is just a high-level overview of what we can expect at Johnston County Schools. And so we've already received that PRC 163, that was the first round of CARES Act. That is a $7.4 million allotment, and of that we have about $4 million left. And a big component of that remaining amount will go towards student devices. About 2.7 million or so of that would be used in the next few months on student devices. And that's not part of the purchase orders that are out there standing now. There's a lot of funds that have come in recently or are in the process that will come in over the next couple months. The next one that you'll see a detailed budget for in the May board meeting. And I think I've been warning that I've got a lot coming up in May. So that's going to be a $29.2 million ESSER2 budget. And so a lot of that is going to cover our summer school, and it's earmarked to cover our virtual academy and then several other things that Dr. Bracey and the curriculum department, the assistant superintendents, they're looking forward to for next year to really hit our academic goals. And you'll see a detailed budget of that coming up at the May meeting. There's a quick turnaround time on this. We have to submit a budget to DPI on May 7th, and so and it was just recently opened up, you know, where we can, and actually I say it was recently opened up, but I don't think we can actually key the budget in the system yet. I don't think all the general ledger codes are even in the system from DPI yet for us to even officially build the budget yet, which is why you don't see a detail tonight. But that is in the works, and just know that we're going to try to turn it around very quickly, and we'll have it on the May meeting. And the big big chunk is going to be to cover summer school. And you also have expiration dates out to the right. And so we've got, a considerable amount of funding that flows through to 2024. And the one thing for everyone to, both here in person and at home, to keep in mind is that we can't supplant other funds with it. So we can't use it to offset, cuts at either state level or the local level. This has to be considered supplemental. It's geared towards learning loss. It's to just provide extra resources to help get our students brought back up to par of where they would have been prior to COVID.
Plus, it's a one-time funding, in 2024, it's gone.
I've heard it called a fiscal cliff.
That's right.
There's a
That's
cliff
right.
coming.
So, when people see this kind of money, they understand that this is not going to be reoccurring. It's gone. When it's gone, it's gone. So paying salaries and stuff like that out of it is very dangerous.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Mr. Britt, too, for all the people at home, this $100 million that we have just showing here is, it's not necessarily, we can't do anything and everything we want to with it. It has stipulations on this money. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that even though we've got this at our fingertips, it's a lot of things that we cannot use this money for.
Right.
And it's major stipulations that we have to abide by. And now, can you just walk us through, and I know you've walked me through it before, so I just want for the people at home to understand, this money is not necessarily in our account per se.
That's right. So how that flow works is I'll start from what we're doing now. We build a budget and we have to write a plan. So we have to tell DPI, like, this is how we're planning to spend it. This is the goals of using that money, and this is what our outcomes are expected to be. So we put all that into a plan, get that into a budget, submit that to DPI. DPI will either accept it or reject it or recommend tweaks to it. And so they go through the budget and make sure it complies with federal law and check that point. And then once that box is checked and DPI has approved it, then it comes to the board, to the local board of education to be approved, and to authorize us to start spending at that point. But the actual cash, so this is all reimbursement based. So we don't actually get $100 million and go into our bank account. I would love to see that happen. I'm just thinking, even with the low interest rates that we have today, what we could do with that $100 million, that would be fantastic. But no, so it's actually a flow through. So you actually cut the check first. So we actually write the checks for all these expenses without actually having the cash in our bank. We have to request the cash, and that's one thing that Tabitha does weekly, is request the cash from the state, who requests the cash from the federal government. And so the cash flows at the time when the checks are written. You just have to write the cash as a check. That's right. Well, we don't bill until the cash is in hand. That's right. That's right.
That's a good format.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Your bank like.
Yeah, because we don't have that kind of money sitting around. I don't have $100 million sitting around that we could float that kind of check. I might be in orange if we started doing that. But that's right. It is all reimbursement based, and there's several approval levels that have to go through. So once it's spent, so even after it's already been, we've had eyes on it from DPI already. We've had eyes on it locally. There's going to be more eyes on it after that. Our external auditors come in and they audit. They consider this a major expense, so they're going to come through and test it. They're going to make sure that whenever we have a $250,000 purchase, that we have gone through the formal bidding process. That when we have payroll that has taken place with federal dollars, that we have what we call time and efforts, which means that the employee has certified, like, yes, I am an employee of Johnston County Public Schools, and I was employed with CARES Act funding, and either the employee or the principal signs to verify that. That auditor checks on that. And after that, we get a review from the DPI federal monitoring program. So there's an enormous amount of reviews and processes in place to safeguard these funds. It's a lot of hoops, but for good reason. It's $100 million. It's $100 million taxpayer dollars that we have here. I know as a taxpayer, I'd want to make sure that my money wasn't being, spent wastefully, and that's the controls and the processes that are in place in North Carolina to safeguard that. There's a lot of eyes on every federal dollar that's spent.
And again, this is mainly to address the learning loss.
That's right.
So our summer learning program, all that will be paid out of this pot.
That's right. That's correct. So if you think about, if we spend $10 million this year in summer school, and we continue, if summer school is continued, and I don't want to say that it is or isn't. We haven't had that conversation with Dr. Bracey yet, but let's just pretend that it is. That's $10 million a year for the next 3 years. So that's 30 or 40. Actually, it'd be 4 years because it's 21, 22, 23, 24. That would be 40 million of the 100 million, just like that. That's gone.
But now, can some of this money be used? I get the summer learning situation that we're going to provide, but can it be used during the school year?
Absolutely.
To also help with loss? That's okay.
That's right. Absolutely. And you'll see a lot of things that will come through on a budget where there's a lot of minds meeting to plan that, of what would be the best bang for the buck. What will provide the maximum amount of student achievement for the dollars that you see. So, but it all has to be extra. It can't replace funds that we are receiving. So, and that is actually the end of my budget talk. I feel like I've left time on the table that I could have been talking numbers. But I'm more than happy to entertain questions, or I've got my phone of friends here and we've got our laptops ready to pull any numbers that you like.
Just so I'm clear, the $72 million that we received last year from our county commissioners, the $5.7 million increase that we went through, that does not include the $2.9 million of capital outlay that we're asking for. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we would add the 5.7 and the 2.9, which would be roughly 8.6 million above our last year's budget.
That's correct.
So
Yes, sir.
8 million more, less than 8 million more.
8.6, I think, if my math.
Yeah, total. I'm just thinking the difference between this year and last year. And the significant difference, well, they're both.
Well,
One an increase of 5 million, 5.7, and the other would be getting 2.1 million more for capital outlay.
I want to compliment Mr. Britt and your team and Dr. Bracey. This is the most thorough budget proposal that I've seen since I've been on the board. And I appreciate the time that you've taken to drill down, but also the intentionality of how these funds will be used to improve student performance. You get what you pay for. And I will say this again, this is an investment in our county. And so I just want to thank you for the hard work. Thank the Finance Committee as well. Those of you who have met and pulled all this together, just hats off to you. Mr. Moore, you as well, pulling all that data together in terms of what we need with capital outlay.
I'd like to thank Mr. Britt and his staff as well. Main thing is thank you for always being prepared and being able to communicate it where people can understand it, and you know it backwards and forwards, and it gives the public confidence that financially we know what we're doing, we know where we are, we know where we're going, and we can prepare for the future when we know where we are. And but I know you got a lot of people on the ground helping you with it. I commend you and your staff for developing a budget, probably one of the best detailed budgets that's been presented in many years. And thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
But I would like to also say, just being on my second month on the job, it's been so rewarding just to kind of hear how you've gone about your business in terms of just being fiscally responsible for the various things that you're presenting to us. So I really appreciate it. I know I've learned a lot just here, sitting and listening and learning. But I think your transparency in terms of the finances and really putting it out there in such a way, as Mr. Wooten said, everybody can easily understand and can go back and research and look at where your numbers are coming from. It's been commendable.
Thank you.
I as well. I could sit here and talk to you all night long. So if you want to sit and talk numbers for a while, we can talk, because I love me some numbers. But yeah, it's good to know that we have some people such as you helping not only to keep it all straight, but to help us understand it, and that's so key. So I'm very grateful to you. I'm especially excited. I'm excited about all of it, but I'm especially excited about the reimbursement possibility for our schools that are low performing. And I'm glad that in the midst of all that's going on, we can take a look at that and see what we can do for these schools.
Thank you.
Mr. Britt, may I ask, it is a good budget. You know, I would say we hate to say this, but you know, we could be more aggressive, but this is a good budget, and what we're asking for is for you know, to operate a good school system. The question that I have, based on let's say at the end of this year, fund balance is what I'm trying to get at right now to get a feel. Okay, if we factor in what our costs would have been had we been in school for the whole year, do you have give us a number of what our fund balance will be at the end of this year?
Yeah, so
Now, and what I would like to hear is if we had been in school full time, what that fund balance would be.
So I'll go back and do a little history. So and Tabitha, correct me if I misspeak here. So if we look at 2019, we spent $6 million worth of fund balance in 1 year. And so we had dropped down to, I think it was about 1.6 million left as of June 30th, 2019. So the school district was in a situation where it could not continue. It could not operate at the same level that it did the previous year. And so we would run out of cash during 2020 at the same level of spending and the same level of funding. And so, you know, in 2020 we received additional help from the county that coincided at pretty much the exact same time that COVID hit, and we shut down the schools and we closed the schools and started saving money. So we went from the end of 2020, we grew up to 9.8 million, but that obviously would not have happened without COVID. You know, we would have been far less than that. I would dare say it would be close to zero, close to no fund balance. And so if we consider the end of 2020 being at close to zero or no fund balance, and then, you know, we're assuming no COVID, we're assuming, you know, the same funding levels, and we're at a break-even point this year, we would still be pretty close to zero of no fund balance. And so that's a huge swing. You know, that's a big swing, because we're talking about $20 million and we're talking about $0. You know, so it's you know, that's substantial. But hopefully this presentation and others, you know, has helped explain like why is there so much difference in you know, so much swing, go from talking about spending and losing $6 million in 1 year all the way to now we're talking about having potentially $20 million in the bank come June 30th. But then COVID is going to end, as I think you're alluding to there, Mr. Carroll. COVID's going to end, and that's going to go away. And so if we don't have sufficient funding going forward, we're going to go right back into dipping into that piggy bank, and we'll start whittling away that 20 million. And that, as you see from looking at our losses of state funds, that goes quick. You know, that we're talking about a 1,250 student loss in funding. You know, that's going to relate to funding. You know, and if we lose $5 or $6 million and we don't have the county dollars to help offset that loss, we're going to start spending fund balance down pretty quick. And so that's kind of the. I think hopefully I answered your question.
Well, what items? There's nothing in the current budget. Well, we don't know what the state budget is, but our anticipation is that we do not go into the fund balance to fund our schools next year.
That's correct. Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen because of the state funding.
That's correct. That's right. So much is unknown. It's like the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, that's the position we're in. We just don't know. And there's a big change. Just like 2019, you were looking at because we were in the same boat at Dr. Bracey in my previous district, where we were forecasting huge raises. And so that was a situation that Johnston was in at the same time. You'd already spent $6 million worth of fund balance. You got 1 point something left, and so you got to not only cut that $6 million of spending, but now you've got all these big raises that are being talked about at the state level that has that trickle-down effect I keep talking about, that trickles down. You got to offset that too. So you got to do both. Going on at the same time, and that's how quickly, because we've got a $400 million budget here, and that's a lot of money. It's an enormous amount of money, but unfortunately, a large part of that is beyond our control. Our number one expense is salaries, and that our salaries are dictated to us, our funding is dictated to us, our benefits are dictated to us. It's you operate within the parameters. And that you're given, and I hate to say it, but COVID pulled a lot of districts out of the red, and
Sure.
it bought a lot of districts time. I mean, you've heard me talk about high water covers a lot of stumps. There was a lot of stumps that were getting ready to be shown. And some of our neighboring districts were in that boat.
But your feeling is, barring, and there always are, I should say, barring unexpected situations such as all of these students coming back and more, and we not having the positions or the funding to, we are in good shape with this budget to operate next year without automatically thinking we got to go to the fund balance to pay the bills.
Right. So yeah, it is
And I'm saying that because historically, way back, that's what happened, and we don't want that to happen.
yeah. Unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that we would, under no circumstance will we spend fund balance next year. And it's too much, because the state could come back and say, well, we want to give everybody we want to make everybody your minimum pay $15 an hour, and that would be great. That we would. I don't think anybody in this room. I don't want to speak for you. I don't think anybody in this room would say that our employees don't deserve $15 an hour. But if the funding doesn't come to offset that, and then we're in trouble. And a lot of other districts are going to be in trouble. So the money has to follow, because we don't have the ability to generate revenue on our own. And so that's one thing that folks at home or our General Assembly need to realize. Especially when they're working on a legislative budget, that they've got to remember the impact that it's going to have on counties and local budgets. Right, because let's say you have a $15 per hour minimum across the board, and the state says, okay, we're going to fund every single state position. Okay, so what about all our child nutrition staff? What about our, right? What about our maintenance staff? Where are those dollars going to come from? And if there's not some sort of offset for it, we're going to be knocking on the county's door and saying, hey, we're being forced to. Well, I shouldn't use the word forced, but we have this mandate, and we don't have money for this mandate. We need help. And $20 million goes quick when because we've seen it. We've spent $6 million in a year, and a lot of that, $6 million that flowed away was in EC. It was, and it's not because EC is just spend. It's in people. It's in staff. It's in the overwhelming majority of that EC budget is in staff that is directly in front of your children.
That's correct.
95% of the budget.
Right. Exactly.
Mr. Britt, Ms. Lee, and the rest of your staff, thank y'all very much. I know this didn't happen this afternoon before we got here. Many hours and ideas and thoughts and just assumptions of what possibly could take place at the state level that could directly impact our local dollars went into this, as well as the Finance Committee. Mr. Wooten and the Finance Committee, please thank everybody that assisted you in getting this, and Dr. Bracey as well. Just like Ms. Sessom said, this by far is the most detailed of a budget that I've seen since I've sat on this side of the horseshoe. And, I think I can say this because I think this came out of the county commissioners meeting, is that even the capital outlay, Mr. Moore, was more detailed than they've ever seen before. And they actually know where those dollars are going, and it's not just, hey, we need this amount. You've detailed it to exactly what it is, which in the past, some of these type of purchases or repairs has had to come out of our bond. And that's not what the bond is for, to assist us with capital outlay. But now they physically see which each project looks like, what's needed, and what the dollar amount is. And we're going to treat that money just like we do our bond money, and watch it very closely. And you've done a great job of that, Mr. Moore. And so from a budget standpoint, I'm very pleased with what we've seen tonight. I commend you all on what you've presented, and look forward to some conversations coming up with some county commissioners to make sure that, we can answer any of their questions, and make sure they understand where we're coming from as far as the budget. And I think that, Mr. Britt, you've laid it out there as the bare minimum. This is what we need if we're going to operate. But more importantly, we have incentivized our DNF schools. And, we've talked about this already. I'm not going to belabor it, but the fact of the matter is this ought to excite a lot of our teachers and classified staff in those buildings, because they do matter. Everybody in this county matters that steps into our schools and assists our students on a daily basis. And it just doesn't stop when they leave that classroom. They're still watching after those kids after hours and in the grocery stores, checking if they see them or whatever it may be, tutoring them or whatever. So that is a great opportunity for us to just to give back to our teachers and staff at those schools, and I hope they're excited about that as well, just as much as I am and the rest of the board is in this room. So, Dr. Bracy, I commend you too on putting this together, as far as just giving them an opportunity to have a bonus like this, a performance bonus. So, thank you all for what you've done, and I look forward to our May 11th meeting where we adopt this budget and we can carry it to the county commissioners. Dr. Bracy.
Just, Mr. Chair, members of the board, in closing, one of the many things that Mr. Britt and I have been excited about since we arrived here is the focus from the Board of Commissioners on student achievement and school performance. And that really stuck with us from the joint meeting. And it is our hope that as they invest in us, and we as a school system give them a great return on their investment as far as student performance is concerned, they will continue to invest even more in us. So that's our goal. And I said it earlier, to give them a high-performing school system, because that high-performing school system will only help as far as economic development is concerned. So we're extremely excited that that's where the focus is. Stephen talks to Chad a lot. I enjoy my great conversations with Mr. Hester, and we're just going to stay together, be very honest and transparent with one another about our needs going forward. But we're very hopeful that the higher we perform and show them we can handle this additional investment in trust, and the results come with that they'll only invest more in us, because as they invest in us, they invest in our children, and they invest in our communities now, and more importantly, our communities of the future. So we're excited. There's so many great things going on here in Johnston County, and I'm excited to be a part of that. I know Mr. Britt is excited to be a part of that as well. So I say thank you for everybody tonight, and I thank this board for your continued support. And Mr. Chair, you said it, for Tabitha and Stephen, thank you for all you do, and people that are not sitting here tonight for the great work that they did in pulling this together. We thank always communication. Caitlin helped us out with this PowerPoint as well. So thank you again.
Thank you, Dr. Bracy. At this time, I'll entertain entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Wooten,
Second.
second by Mr. Byrd. We will do a roll call due to having one of our members on Zoom. I'll start with Ms. Andrews. Yes. Mr. Byrd.
Yes.
Ms. Essems.
Yes.
Mr. Carroll.
Yes.
Mr. Wooten.
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion carries 6-0. We're adjourned.